And Chapter 7. So, let's begin. Chapter 6 dealt with how to get the audience's attention. Chapter 7 deals with where to go from there. I would say that some of the hardest parts of writing a speech can come with how to begin a speech and how to end a speech. We're going to talk about why specifically that might be the case, but in this chapter, we're going to talk about the specific strategies for both beginning and ending a speech, because as we talked about in Chapter 6, beginning a speech in a creative, interesting way is a great way to immediately hook the audience, and by closing out our speech in a memorable way, we give the audience a reason to remember our speech. Just as important as keeping the audience's attention throughout our speech is we have to then give our speech and the audience has to remember it 5 minutes after they listen to it. Because if someone listens to the entirety of what you just said and the next day they can't even tell you what your speech was about, then what was even the point of giving that speech? It's like that old adage, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Well, if you give a speech to 30 different people and 30 people can't even remember what you said, did you even give that speech in the first place? So let's go ahead and we're not going to start with that, a bit too vague, but I would like to open this up a little bit to a rhetorical question and ask y'all, what are some memorable opening or closing statements you remember from speeches you've heard or seen? Can you recall any speeches that began an interesting way, that ended in a way that left an impact with you? Anything at all?
No.
Anyone?
They'll introduce themselves and then they ask people some question and that's it.
But can you recall a specific time you heard that in a speech, Luke? Where it really
when I went to attend my anthropology meeting, and I was surprised that there's a bunch of participants that I thought I don't even know my professor is there herself. So it was, they introduced them, and then we end up meeting each person, all the people in the panel, and they each have their own way of talking to people.
But the key of this chapter is how do they begin talking to people in a way that makes them stand out from the crowd. So for example, if I'm interviewing, there are 32 of you in this class, if I'm interviewing all 32 of you, and all of you begin with in the same way saying, hi, my name is Lou, hi, my name is Eric, hi, my name is Janelle, hi, my name is Rodrigo, then what makes your speech stand out from everybody else's? And that's what we're going to deal with in this specific chapter. Anna, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. I remember Martin Luther King with I Have a Dream.
And that was the opening line of probably one of the most famous speeches in American history.
Yep.
Right? That immediate opening line around which he structured the entirety of his speech evoked such a clear metaphor for the entire nation that the speech, when did he give it? The 60s? The speech is already about 60 years old at this point. It still has an incredible impact on all of us. And that's how important an opening statement can be. Not a lot of people can quote the entirety of that speech, but they know immediately, just say those words, and they know immediately who said it, for what purpose, and a little bit about what that speech was about. That's how important an opening statement can be. So, as I just said, the beginning and ending of your speech may be just as important as what you actually say during the content of your speech. I emphasize this because a lot of people are used to writing introductions and conclusions like they would in an English class, where the conclusion is just something I have to write because I have to end my speech because I've been writing for 2 hours now and I really want this to be done. And they begin the introduction just so they can write something and then they can actually get into the heart of what they want to talk about. But I reiterate, the beginning and ending, those first few opening and closing lines, may have just as large an impact as a 7 to 8 minute speech. That's why you want to pay incredible attention towards creating the introduction and conclusion that has the greatest possible impact on the audience. That's easier said than done, though, because the beginning and ending of a speech are often the most creative and therefore difficult parts of a speech. I can tell you to use details and examples in your main body. I can't necessarily tell you what is a funny way to begin a speech, what is a memorable way to close a speech. Those are all a little bit more specific. I can give you some specific strategies, but ultimately creating that opening hook that actually gets the audience listening, that can be a little bit frustrating. And that's why my students typically reach out the most in terms of wanting feedback on their introduction and their conclusion. 9 times out of 10, someone emails me about asking for help with their outline. They're asking me to take a look at their attention gainer, or they're asking me to take a look at their thesis statement, and so on.
Professor.
Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Hey, you kind of got me thinking about a speech that, caught my attention. And I kind of remember when President Obama spoke about DACA, when he first announced DACA. The fact is that I have a lot of friends that are on DACA that I met in college, for example, and then they got me thinking, because I have, sympathy towards their cause and whatever. I don't have the problem, but I sympathize with them. So the speech starts as, these are young people who study in our schools, they play in our neighborhoods, they're friends with our kids. That was pretty cool.
Very much so. What he's using there is, like we talked about in chapter 6, he's using vivid description. He's having us empathize not with an abstract issue with the DACA as a program, but as something that affects the lives of thousands of people every single day, and to empathize with them, right? By having us focus on that individual human perspective, it gives us a vivid idea of who this program is going to be affecting, not just what this program is. So you can see how vivid description goes a long way. You don't necessarily need to tell us in your speech of introduction, my family means the world to me. You can open your story with a vivid description of a time when you went on vacation with your family, or a time when your family were there for you during a difficult period in your life. And that is a much more memorable way to open your speech than just beginning with something that the audience can't really connect to, like family is the most important thing to me. Because that's something that a lot of people could say, but not necessarily refer to them specifically. So, thank you for that, Rodrigo.
Yes,
now,
sir.
We're going to begin, of course, with the introduction. Here we're going to outline our main goals for every good introduction, and how we can apply those towards our speech of and how we can apply those towards our next upcoming speech. It's awkward to say introduction to our speech of introduction, but whatever. So we're going to go through 5 principal objectives, the first of which, as we talked about in chapter 6, is gaining attention. We talked all about the importance of gaining the audience's attention, and here are just a few strategies we can use when trying to open up our speech. We can use a quote from a famous person, from a more educated person in that specific field, from an author that really resonates with us, from a family member we really idolize or who is a role model to us. By opening with a quotation, we're letting others pull what's called rhetorical weight. We're able to let the words of others we're letting them explain something in much better words than we ever could. And, for example, by quoting celebrities or famous figures, we give our own speech a little bit more credibility. We let our speech sound a little bit more educated, a little bit more important, because now we're letting the credibility of others pull our speech forward. We can also, and you've seen this do me a ton of times in all my lectures, you can open with a direct question or a rhetorical question. Now, this is a bit awkward when you're going to be recording your speeches, uploading them, people are going to be watching them later, so you're not necessarily going to get a live audience. But opening your speech with a direct or rhetorical question is a great way to have the audience actually reflect on something that they might not have thought about before. By getting them to reflect, by getting them to see the world in a new perspective, then you can have them reconsider what they do, what they say, their actions, and the effects of those actions on other people. And by getting them to process that, you're getting them a little bit more invested into the actual speech. Sometimes all it takes is just a small rhetorical question, and that really gets us reconsidering everything about a subject we might not have considered before, or that we might have taken for granted. So I could open with a rhetorical question just by asking, okay, when was the last time you did something for someone else without any expectation of them doing anything for you or any expectation of payment? When's the last time you did a truly selfless act of service? Can you name a specific time? And then the audience is going to start thinking, okay, well, surely, yeah, of course I do that. And then they're going to start thinking, they're going to start reconsidering. And in my experience, a lot of people might not necessarily think of something immediate. The last time they did this was in the past week or so, because we take for granted a little bit of the time how many of us can do something, but also expect, okay, I did something, so now someone can be a little bit nicer to me in the future. Or I did something and hey, maybe they're going to owe me a favor from now on, and so on. You could also open with a visual aid. Remember back on Monday when I showed you the graph of wealth disparity, how that used an image to convey an idea much better than words ever could to an audience? A visual aid is really helpful to that. You know the old adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words? Well, by immediately opening with a picture, now the audience is able to evoke a much clearer image of whatever concept you're trying to grasp with them. You're going to see how effective a visual aid is going to be during your informative speech and later on in your persuasive speech. You can also open with a short story or anecdote. Humans love stories. People really, really love stories. We don't like concepts being referred to as vague abstractions. We don't like just talking about things. We much rather have things framed within a clear and cohesive story, to have a beginning, middle, and end, to have characters we can relate to have events that we can put ourselves within, to have a clear lesson, to have a satisfying conclusion, and so on. Think of how you learned history in your school. You didn't really learn about history as a series of events just kind of happening at the same time. You learned about it as a story. A lot of people learn about the history of the United States, for example, as a clear story. We came on the Mayflower, and then George Washington, and then the United States, and then here's a bunch of wars the United States fought in, and now we're at this point. And it's a clear story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. That end is now, which is always ongoing, but to us it feels like the last chapter. There's a reason for that. Humans use stories to make sense of their environment. It's a great way to make sense of a lot of confusing things that our brains haven't really been equipped to process. Rodrigo, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I actually, so regarding my example, like educating and versus getting educated, right? Remember like the two books we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
How, I'm not asking you to give it to me, but like how would you gain attention for that specific situation? Like,
is this the only class you're currently in, Rodrigo?
No.
What's your hardest class that you're currently taking or did take?
The hardest ever?
Yep. Or even the hardest here at Miramar?
Advanced instrument piloting, flying.
Probably a lot of studying, right?
A lot of math, yeah.
A lot of math? You think a lot of people are huge fans of studying for a math class?
No.
So what they can do is they can relate to the experience of having to stay up late studying for a big math exam, right? Now, I'm being very vague here and I'm making a lot of assumptions, but
right.
How you can connect to the audience is, okay, they might not have taken that specific class, but they can relate to the idea of having to take that one really, really tough class. That one
right.
class that it seems takes all of your time and effort, that you just can't seem to stop working on, that you really have to just keep studying. A great
right.
way to frame that in terms of a story is you could just open your speech with, tell us about what it was like studying for an upcoming test in that class. Again, I'm being very vague here. That's just one way you can connect to the audience, right? Because now, instead of saying that class is hard and we don't really know why, by giving us that vivid description of the amount of work you put into that course or into any other course. You could even give a vivid description of how much of a pain in the ass it could be just trying to record a speech and upload it in this class itself. Again, you're more than welcome to trash this class. You can already relate to your audience that way. That way they now know the amount of work you're putting into your speech, and they're able to connect with you because they're all in the same boat. Taking a college class isn't an easy for anyone.
So it's basically this gaining attention is basically I can approach my theme by talking about something that I relate with the audience, and that way I'm gonna get their attention, and then I can start talking about the specifics of my case or whatever.
Exactly, because now that you've connected with them, now that they can go, okay, we have this in common, now you have their attention, and now you can go more into detail into your specific perspective. Because while they might not have that specific perspective, by giving them that opening connecting theme, by letting them connect to it in some way, you've now given them, it's now much easier for them to get invested in the actual story.
Right.
Or speech, sorry.
All right, thanks, Professor. You answered my question.
No problem. So, last strategy you can use, you can acknowledge some praise. You probably heard this in a lot of special occasion speeches, in a lot of celebration speeches, a lot of award acceptance speeches. You can come up and you can just thank some people. I'd like to thank my family. I'd like to thank my coworkers. I'd like to thank my, I don't know, director of photography or whatever. By acknowledging praise, it's a great way to gain attention because now the audience sees you as a little bit more humble, sees you as a little bit more approachable, and therefore a lot easier to actually relate to and connect with. After you've gained the audience's attention, what you now want to make clear to the audience is what is your speech about and why are you giving it? You deliver this as a clear purpose statement. This is your thesis. This is where the audience gets to know, okay, here's what your speech is about. And here's where I want to be especially clear. Your speech isn't about your two objects. Your speech isn't about your theme. Your speech isn't about those general ideas. Your speech is about you and how you connect to that theme. I emphasize this because I tell people to have a theme, and then they write an entire speech on how important family is to all of us. They go, we all need family in our lives, and family is what connects us and what binds us, and it's the earth and it's the earth that binds all things together, and we all revolve around it, and other flowery metaphors. But then I don't learn anything about the speaker specifically. Your thesis statement is about how you connect to that theme. What role does this concept play in your life? And so on, okay? So your thesis statement is answering, what is your speech trying to do? What do you want the audience to get out of this today? What do you want them to learn? And what will your speech ultimately be about? Then you also want to establish the significance of the topic. You want to answer the audience's question of, how does this affect me? Why should I listen? How can I apply this in my own life? I'm going to be a little bit of a pessimist and say that most people don't necessarily want to listen just for the sake of entertainment. They'll typically only listen to a speech if it's immediately relevant to them, if they can apply it to their own life in some way. Now, it's a bit of an open-ended question, but how do you think you can answer this question during a speech of introduction? How do you demonstrate the significance of a topic when the topic is you and you're speaking to people who are not you? Anybody?
Maybe we can use a subject that might be relevant for everybody, like education or...
And what would we call that subject, Anna? Starts with a T.
Thesis? I don't know.
The theme, right?
Oh,
Close. That's why we're using themes. That's why we're using a general idea that everyone can connect to, because that's how we establish the significance of the topic. We can teach somebody, if by demonstrating how we connect to a theme, we can teach somebody, okay, here's how you can see this theme in a new way. Here's how you can reevaluate how you connect to that topic. So that's how we establish that topic's significance. That's why I'm a huge stickler on theme. I'm not just being arbitrary about it. The theme is a great way to unite your entire speech into one clear, cohesive product, and it's a great way for the audience to connect with it and say, okay, here's why I should listen, here's how it can affect me, here's how I can apply this to my own circumstances. Next in your introduction, I'm just moving around a little pain all over the place, but next in your topic, you want to establish credibility. You actually want to have the audience think, okay, here's why they need to listen. Sorry, I just saw someone in chat come up, but here's why we need to listen because I'm the most credible in the room. Now, this isn't necessary for your speech of introduction because, again, I don't really think you need to establish your credibility on yourself. I kind of have a feeling that the person who knows Lou best is Lou. But what you do want to do for more specialized topics, such as your informative speech, your persuasive speech, and so on, is you want to go, okay, here's why I'm the person who knows the most about this subject and therefore am most qualified to speak about it. Because there's a reason that I'm giving this lecture right now. There's a reason that I mentioned my educational background in the first week of the class. Because otherwise, if you just thought I was some guy, if I was just some random person talking to you and I didn't have any kind of qualifications, then you'd be thinking to yourself, okay, why should I listen to him when I could just read the textbook on my own? Why should I pay attention to him talking for an hour and 15 minutes, however boring that gets, as opposed to just trying to teach myself the content? That's why I mentioned my educational background. That's why I try to speak with a calm, relaxed attitude. That's why I try to use prepared presentations. All of it is trying to demonstrate to you that I know the most about public speaking. Well, not the most in the world, but I know a lot about public speaking, and therefore I'm qualified to teach you about it. Rodrigo, do you have your hand up?
Yes, that's the story of my life, Professor. I don't know if you're familiar with the airline business. You have a lot of people with seniority, right? Mm-hmm. So people that have been working with the airline for 30 years, 40 years. So therefore, they believe that they know everything. So when they have a young person like me conducting a presentation or talking about something, because I'm a certified trainer for several things, right? Because of the background I have as flying planes and, you name it, like aviation degrees and everything. So I always have to show my credentials, like they say. I always have to tell them, like, oh, I went to school for that, and I was extensively trained to speak about that, because otherwise they won't pay attention, because they will be just like, oh, I know better than him that he does.
Exactly, right?
Right.
Because the audience is going to read a surface level impression of you, and you have to go a little bit beyond that to demonstrate your credibility. I say especially I'd have to do that in a lot of community college classes because, again, the first thing that I think one of the first questions students asked me in the first week of this class was, how old am I? Because there's immediately that question of, okay, does he actually know what he's talking about? Does he actually have experience in the field? It's a natural assumption to make. Again, it's a cognitive reflex that all humans possess. But again, that's why we want to try to channel our credibility by either first demonstrating our expertise, so we can talk about how long we've been in the field, some specific accomplishments we've had in the field. A great way to demonstrate your credibility if you were to give a speech on flying, Rodrigo, is to just demonstrate how long you've had your pilot's license for, and so on, right? You can also cite expert sources. We don't necessarily have to be the most credible person in the room. I don't have to get a PhD in environmental sciences to give a speech on climate change. But I can get my information from people who do have that kind of expertise. By citing sources of research, by saying, I got my research from the New York Times, Harvard University, and the Center for Disease Control, now the audience might say, okay, so this person doesn't know the most about the subject, but they've done a lot of research from credible sources. So by extension, the information they're about to give me is credible and therefore worth knowing. And the last way we can channel that credibility is in the actual style that we deliver a speech. Credibility isn't just about looking like the most qualified or the smartest person in the room. Sometimes the manner with which we deliver a speech demonstrates credibility. I stumble over my words a lot, but I try to speak with as calm and confident attitude as possible. I try to speak with my hands. I try to give as many examples as I can, because the more confident and the more casual I sound, the more it sounds like I know particular content. The more it sounds like I don't need to read from this textbook to teach it to you. So this is just a brief little activity, but we're just going to keep moving on. And go ahead, Rodrigo.
Why do people associate expertise with age? Like I always find that super funny. I don't get it.
I think it just comes from that perspective of, you know, we typically tend to see if someone's older, they're going to have a little bit more experience than us. They're going to have a little bit more knowledge in that particular field, and so on, right? Again,
Right.
it's a cognitive thing that comes back from very, very early on in our development. And again, it's just that natural reflex. It even comes down to like the halo effect, right? That's like the psychological reflex that we think more attractive people are therefore nicer and more trustworthy. It's just like, it's a cognitive reflex kind of thing.
Right.
But again, an easy way to counter that is just go, okay, so I might look young, but I've studied this for the past 10 years and I have hundreds of thousands of hours in academic research. Therefore, this is why I'm credible, right? Everyone needs to establish their credibility no matter what their age. These are just some ways to actually do so, okay? So,
Can I ask you a question, Professor?
Go ahead, Lou.
You said you're young. Is it because you how you say it? Instead of you went ahead, or you're like a gifted, right?
I wouldn't say I'm gifted. I almost failed out of my first year of San Diego State. So I definitely wouldn't say I'm gifted, Lou. Again, I don't say I've moved any further or faster than anyone else. I think I think people just have this idea of what a college instructor or college professor looks like, and I just kind of play a little bit against that norm. And I'm not necessarily more accomplished or anything like that. Far from it. It's just I just don't really think I play into the ideas people would usually have of college faculty.
Boy, if I knew I came here 22. If I knew it's so easy to go to school, I could have been the first president of United States. Just kidding. I'm just making everybody laugh.
Of course, right? Which is very important for public speaking. Again, right? That's why I always have the idea that it's not that, you know, school education has something for everybody and that everyone can work through it and find their own way forward. That's why I love teaching this class so much, because you're going to have students who are actually committed towards a goal. They want to do something. Whereas when I taught at San Diego State and things like that, a lot of people are just kind of there just because they feel like they have to go to college. They don't really know what they want to get out of it. They just feel pressured to go to it because their parents would yell at them otherwise. So now that we talked about objectives for a strong introduction, here are just some objectives for a strong conclusion. If the introduction is about getting the audience's attention and giving them an idea of what the entire speech is going to be about, the conclusion is about reviewing everything you just talked about and making absolutely sure that the audience is on the same page as you when you're done with this speech, that they learned exactly what you wanted them to learn once you're done speaking. So that means that for a strong conclusion, we are re-summarizing our main points and our purpose statement. In the format of your speech of introduction outline, I'm asking you to restate your thesis and to review your main points. Not just repeating those statements word for word, because that gets a little bit boring. You never want to repeat the same thing in your speech. You always want to try to deliver new content, but by mentioning, here's what my speech was about, now the audience is reminded and has a much stronger impression. It's about repetition. Repetition has a much stronger impact on the audience's long-term memory. This isn't necessarily required, but you also can refer to your introduction. We talked about how strong speeches come together as one clear, cohesive whole, everything planned together for a purpose. We're going to talk more about that in chapter 8. But by referring to your introduction, by what's called bookending, by ending in a similar way as you began, it now looks so much more like you planned everything to feed into one another. So what a lot of people have done in the past is if your introduction begins with a story, you don't necessarily have to tell that full story right then in your introduction. You can stop your story at the halfway mark, and where it's getting good, and just as the audience is a little bit interested to see how it ends, and then save the ending for the conclusion of your speech. That way, you've satisfied the audience's curiosity, you've made sure that they've paid close attention throughout the entire speech, and you've kind of baited that hook of interest. You've kind of wanted people to follow along in the hopes that they learn the ending to your story. That book ending is just one of many strong ways that you can end any speech. But above all, what you want to be sure is that you have a memorable finish, that you actually end on a closing line that the audience will remember days after you've delivered it. That's why I don't want you to end your speech with thank you. I repeat, I do not want you to end your speech by saying thank you for listening or some version of that. Now, I'm not against manners. I love saying please and thank you and sorry and all that. But if I don't say something about it, every single person will end their speech by saying thank you. I guarantee it. At least 9 out of 10 students will end their speech by saying, all right, and thank you for listening. But if everyone's doing that, if everyone's ending in the same way, then that defeats the point. Their conclusion is no longer memorable. So you always want to endeavor to end with emphasis, to end on a line that really resonates with the audience. And by doing so, by making your speech stand out, make it a little bit easier for the audience to get invested and to recall that information. So, Rodrigo, do you have your hand up, or is that just from the last question?
Yeah, I forgot to put it down. I'm sorry.
No worries. Now that we finished chapter 7, we're just going to switch right into chapter 8. Now, can you all see the PowerPoint? I'm still kind of iffy if when you switch PowerPoints, it's still screen shares, but we can see it?
No, it's clear.
Okay. So, with chapter 7, we talked about how to start a speech and by proxy a speech outline. But here, we're going to go into all the details of how to actually write your speech outline. So, this is the warm-up question, but again, we're just going to breeze right past it. Let me ask you this. We're in a public speaking class. Public speaking. And on Sunday, you are going to submit a written assignment that's going to be graded for grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Let's ask the obvious question in the room. Why do you need to write in a public speaking class? Why do I require that of you?
Because that's how you start your creation process. That's how you're gonna speak, by putting down your ideas.
But what if I don't need to put down my ideas, Rodrigo? What if I'm really good at just speaking in the moment?
Then I don't know.
Because there's
have
all...
like
Go ahead,
to
Janelle.
have like a better flow of what you actually need to say.
Flow. What do you mean by that, Janelle?
Like sometimes there's like a broken sentence or like paragraph and stuff, and you need to like connect those two, and the end of the first paragraph and the second paragraph.
Exactly. Creating transitions is just one of many reasons why an outline can help. Because like we talked about, we want our speech to come across as a clear, cohesive whole. We want our beginning to feed into our middle, to build upon our end. That's really difficult to do if you're just coming up with it in the moment, because we don't really think in terms of those strict patterns. We're not immediately organizing a speech as we talk. We just kind of say what's on our mind, and if it makes sense, we just keep talking. But eventually we're going to come up to a point where we run out of things to say. You probably heard it from me a million times just in this specific lecture. When we don't really know what we're going to say next, then, well, actually, I'm not going to get a little bit too into the details because that bleeds over a little bit too much into my next question. Can you recall a time where someone clearly hadn't planned their speech? How did you know they hadn't planned it out? Anybody?
Yeah, my boss's Christmas party speech. He wasn't thinking what he said.
How'd you know he hadn't planned it out, Rodrigo?
Because he started repeating himself like 10 times in the same sentence.
Why do you think we do that? Why do you think we repeat ourselves when we don't really know what to say?
Because you don't know what to say.
Exactly. Because the mind, like we talked about on Monday, the mind doesn't actually like to multitask. It doesn't like being split between two different things. So it'll typically default to what's easier when it has to do that. When you have to come up with your speech on the fly, when you have to wing it, as I call it, when you have to wing your speech, you're splitting your mind into two tracks. You're splitting it into the track of, okay, you have to create the speech and you have to say the speech while delivering it with style. By doing so, your brain goes, okay, I don't really have the processing power for that, so I'm going to find a line that makes sense, and then I'm just going to keep coming back to it because that's something safe and stable, and I know that works. It's part of the reason why I keep repeating myself so many times in my lectures. Again, I'm going to keep flogging myself over that one because it is painful to listen to myself when I upload these to YouTube. But the mind just keeps spinning in that one track. It doesn't actually like creating new content. That's why we write our outlines ahead of time. By doing so, now the mind doesn't have to rely so much on generating that new stuff, and it just needs to focus on delivering it with energy, with emphasis, by using our hands, by keeping eye contact, by varying our voice and tone. So that's just one of many reasons, as I said earlier, I even repeated myself just then, of why we want to outline our speeches and why those outlines are a graded assignment. Because by receiving a grade on it, by getting feedback of, okay, I think this works, I think you can change this, we can improve our speeches for when we actually deliver it. It's like submitting a rough draft and then finally having the opportunity for a final draft. So some things to keep in mind when writing your outline are, first, break up your speech from general idea to main point to subpoint. By doing so, you're able to much more easily work on individual elements of your speech. You can break up your speech into distinct categories because now your general idea is, I want to introduce myself. Your specific purpose is, I want to introduce myself using this common theme. Your main points are, I want to introduce myself using this common theme represented by these two main objects. Your subpoints then are, I have this object and I'd like to tell this story related to this object. By doing so, by working your way down, now it no longer feels like you're working on this enormous giant assignment all at once. It feels like you're making incremental progress. And not only is it easier to write, but it's easier for the audience to follow along. Now the audience can get engaged by one specific subpoint while still having an idea of how everything connects back to that. Which leads to coherence. Coherence is about creating one single speech, a single speech with a singular point, not just two mini speeches. You don't just want to give one speech about your first object and another speech about your second object, because then the audience is much more unlikely to remember the entirety of what you just talked about. So whenever you're writing something, you want to be asking, okay, how does this sentence feed into the rest of the speech? We use this through the rule of division. So first, we ask, how does each main point, how does each object build upon our thesis? How does each subpoint of each main point build upon the main point? And as Janelle described, we want to use effective transitions too. How can we connect one main point to the next? How can we let the audience know, here's how these two main points are related? So, does that make sense so far? He says, like 45 minutes into the lecture. I probably should have said
Yes.
that a little bit earlier. Okay. What happened? Okay. No. Okay. Then we have the rule of completeness. Now, the rule of completeness is using full sentences. I say this because the more you write for yourself, the more you're able to pick and choose for your actual speech. A lot of the time when I don't emphasize the rule of completeness, a lot of students just turn in bullet points for their outline. They turn in bullet points that are just a few sentences or a few even words of what I call IOUs. So rather than writing out the story they plan to tell in their speech, they'll just write, tell story about family. And that'll be written in their outline, and that's what I have to grade. Well, when they write that, tell story about family, then they have to, when they actually deliver their speech, come up with the content of that story. They're splitting their mind into those two tracks again. Now they have to come up with a story, which then forces their mind to have to repeatedly recycle. By recycling that, that's where you're going to get a lot more of those uhs, ums, you knows, you guys. It's the mind struggling to find what next to say. The more you write, the less pressure you take off of yourself with content you have to create in your speech. You don't have to write out every single word. I did put a page maximum just because some people were turning in 9-page outlines for a 3-minute speech, which you can't really fit into a 3-minute speech, but you want to try to find that middle ground. You want to write out just enough content that you now know what you'd like to say in your speech. That doesn't mean you have to say all of it, but now you have a lot more to pick and choose from. There's always a benefit towards giving yourself more options when speaking rather than less. It also demonstrates how everything is connected. It feeds back into that rule of coherence. It helps especially with me because I have to grade this outline. I have to grade this outline without any of the context you can provide me. So I have to ask, if you write in your outline, tell story about your family, I can't really grade that without context. I don't know if you're going to use vivid detail. I don't know if it does connect towards your main point, to your theme, to your thesis, and so on. So it also demonstrates to me how everything fits together. And it helps, like I said, establish all of those prior 3 criteria. It helps your speech sound more coherent, it divides it so it's easier to follow along, and it helps fulfill balance. Balance makes sure that you're giving everything this equal amount of attention so that your speech never weighs too much towards one particular subject. You want to keep balance in mind in your speech introduction because you don't want to talk too much about one object rather than another, because then your speech becomes about that object, not about the theme connecting those 2 objects together. So you want to try to devote an equal amount of time. If your speech is 3 minutes long, then don't spend longer than about a minute each per object. The longer your speech on one object, then the shorter and harder to remember the second object is going to be. And here are just some organization patterns you can use to help structure your content. You can structure your content by topic. You can say, as with the speech introduction, a lot of you are going to do, this object represents this part of me, this object represents this aspect of my life. Easy way to split things up. You can also split your subject based around time. You can structure things around the coherent story of past, present, and future. A lot of speeches of introduction use themes of time to convey their point. They can use themes of change or growth, how they've changed, how they've changed, how they've grown, how they've improved over their lives, and so on. A common theme I've seen is this object represents my past, what I used to do, and this object represents my future, what I would like to do, what I'm working towards, my goals, where I see myself in 10 years, and so on. You can organize organize your speech by environment. You can organize it by, let me tell you first about this part located here and this location here. Let me give you a tour of my house. Let me tell you what first happened in North America. Then I'll tell you what happened in Europe, and so on. And you can also organize it by causal relationships, by what caused something else. First, I'll talk about this object, which represents some of my hardships, and then I'll talk about this object, which represents how I overcame those hardships, or what those hardships led me towards. A little bit similar to chronological organization, but by demonstrating causation, you help create a much more coherent, easy to follow story. Some other organization patterns, similar to causation, is problem and solution. You're going to talk about that in your persuasive speeches. What is the problem and what is your proposed solution to help mitigate that problem? You can use comparative advantage. You can compare 2 different subjects. You can talk about, here's this subject, here's this subject, here's what this subject does well, here's what this subject does well, and then leave it up to the audience to determine which is better. And lastly, you can just organize your speech by a general narrative, by telling a story. First, I'll tell you about about my childhood, then I'll tell you about my life as a teenager, then I'll tell you about my early adulthood, and then I'll tell you how I came to this point in my life, right? Again, narratives are easy for the audience to follow, very easy for the audience to get engaged by. You can frame your entire speech of introduction as one single story, the story of you, with a common theme binding that story together. So the story, it could be how I came to a new relationship with my family, how I embarked on my journey of self-discovery or self-improvement, and so on. So that pretty much wraps up chapters 7 and 8. Does anyone have any questions on either chapters before we head out?
I'm good.
Okay, well, that wraps up chapters 7 and 8. That talks about how to begin and end our speeches and how to actually approach our speech outline. If you have any questions on any of the content that we talked about here today or on your speech of introduction outline, I encourage you to please, please, please reach out to me in whatever way you can. You can email me, you can stop at my office hours, you can email me to see if we can schedule an individual Zoom appointment. I encourage you to reach out in any way you can on your speech of introduction rough draft. I'm here to help give feedback in whatever way I can. So if you're struggling with any particular aspect, don't hesitate. Let me see how I can help you. So, any other questions on the course before we head out?
Hey, Professor, you have a few minutes after the class?
Of course.
Yeah, cool. I'll stay in then.
Okay. Any other questions for anyone else?
I send you email, Professor. Have a good weekend.
You too, Lou. See you next week.
We'll be talking.
Very much so.
Oh,
Looking forward to it.
Do I need to make an appointment if I need to see you on office hour tomorrow?
No, you can just drop in during my office hours.
The
The link is on Zoom. The
Okay.
link is on Canvas.
Alrighty, thank you.
Alrighty, have a great rest of your day.
Bye,
Rodrigo,
everyone.
bye, Lou. Rodrigo, did you want to talk in private?
Yeah, well, whatever. I mean, it's not private. I mean,
Okay.
I just didn't want to do it like, don't want to bother you in front of the class.
No worries. Class is pretty much over. We're done with the lecture for today. So,
Okay.
So Janelle, Anna, if you'd like,
Okay,
you
bye,
can hang out.
Professor.
We're free to chat. Okay. See you later, Anna. See you later, Janelle. Sorry.
I actually wanted to share my thesis, but I can wait until you are done with Rodrigo.
Of course.
You
feel
can
free
go.
to
You
hang
can
out.
go ahead. You can go ahead. You can go ahead first. That's
Oh,
fine.
okay. So I've been thinking that I'm gonna talk about my the pressure that I have for good grades,
Mhm.
but also my passion for running. So the thesis that I have so far is I'm always looking to improve my grades, and I found that training for a half marathon had a great impact in my focus, discipline, thus my grades.
I really like that because you're demonstrating how two seemingly unrelated things are able to come together and how one improves upon the other. You don't necessarily need to say it, well, you can say it a little bit, you can streamline it a little bit more. You can just say, my passion for running has helped me improve my focus and determination when getting good grades or when working my classes.
Okay, that sounds better.
Again, right, it's just about, I feel like, again, the theme, people are a little bit inclined, they kind of want to say everything in one sentence. You don't have to say all of it, just a little bit of a simpler way to put it.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna work on this, and then if I have more questions, I'm just gonna join your office hours tomorrow.
Of course. If you have any other questions before then, feel free to email me, okay, Anna?
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye. You too.
Go ahead, Rodrigo.
Oh no, Professor. It's because I wanted to ask for permission to skip